In late 2025, while much of the world's attention was focused on global diplomacy, security agencies in the United States quietly dismantled what they described as one of the most serious telecommunications threats ever uncovered on American soil. The incident did not involve malware, ransomware, or the kind of cyber attacks most people are familiar with. There were no hacked websites, no leaked databases, and no computers flooding the internet with traffic. Instead, the threat came from something far more ordinary. SIM cards. Tens of thousands of them, hidden across apartments, offices, and commercial spaces in and around New York City. Investigators uncovered an extensive network of devices designed to exploit the very foundation of modern mobile communication. What authorities found was not a traditional cyber attack, but something potentially just as disruptive. A massive SIM-based infrastructure capable of overwhelming cellular networks from the inside. This is the story of how that network was discovered, what it was capable of doing, and why officials considered it an imminent threat to public safety. The investigation came to light when the United States Secret Service announced that it had dismantled a large-scale telecommunications operation in the New York metropolitan area. According to officials, agents seized more than 100,000 SIM cards, along with hundreds of SIM servers and specialized telecommunications devices. These systems were distributed across multiple locations, not in a single warehouse, but spread deliberately to reduce detection. Some of the sites were residential apartments, others were small offices or commercial units. All were linked by the same purpose: generating enormous volumes of mobile network traffic. The timing of the discovery raised immediate alarm. The operation was uncovered in the days leading up to the United Nations General Assembly, an event that brings heads of state, diplomats, and security delegations from around the world to New York City. Law enforcement officials later confirmed that the potential impact of the network, if activated, could have affected mobile communications in key parts of the city during one of the most security-sensitive periods of the year. To understand why this discovery was so serious, it's important to understand what investigators actually found. At the center of the operation were what are commonly known as SIM farms. A SIM farm is a collection of physical SIM cards, sometimes hundreds of thousands, connected to hardware that allows them to send and receive calls and text messages automatically. Each SIM card behaves like a normal mobile phone subscription. It registers with local cell towers, authenticates with the network, and consumes signaling and bandwidth just like a phone in someone's pocket. But when thousands of SIM cards operate at once, controlled by automation, the result is very different. Instead of one person sending a few messages, a SIM farm can generate millions of texts or calls in a short period of time, all appearing legitimate at the network level. Unlike internet-based attacks, there is no obvious malicious traffic signature. To the cellular provider, it simply looks like massive demand. The incident has often been described in headlines as a DDoS-style attack, but that description only tells part of the story. Traditional distributed denial-of-service attacks rely on compromised computers flooding a website or server with internet traffic. Defenders can block IP addresses, rate limit requests, or reroute traffic through mitigation services. Mobile networks work very differently. Cellular infrastructure depends on constant signaling between devices and towers. Registration requests, authentication messages, handovers, and routing updates. These processes are essential for phones to function, and they are far harder to filter without affecting legitimate users. A SIM-based attack targets these signaling systems directly. By forcing cell towers to handle overwhelming volumes of legitimate-looking activity, an attacker can degrade service without ever hacking anything in the traditional sense. Calls fail. Text messages are delayed or dropped. In extreme cases, entire cell sectors can become unavailable. This is why investigators describe the New York SIM network as capable of causing denial of service-like effects on cellular communications. What shocked investigators most was not just the concept, but the scale. Initial seizures revealed more than 100,000 SIM cards connected to hundreds of SIM servers. Later searches, including operations in neighboring states, uncovered tens of thousands more cards linked to the same network. To put that into perspective, even a small fraction of those SIM cards generating traffic simultaneously could create congestion across multiple cell towers. Officials warned that the system was capable of sending tens of millions of messages per minute, a volume far beyond normal consumer or business use. This wasn't spam in the traditional sense. It was infrastructure stress. The Secret Service described the operation as an imminent telecommunications threat, a phrase that immediately raised questions. Why imminent? First, the network was already fully assembled. The SIM cards were active. The hardware was installed. There was no technical barrier preventing activation. Second, the locations were carefully chosen. Many were close to dense urban areas with high mobile usage and limited redundancy in local cell infrastructure. Third, the timing coincided with a period when reliable communications were especially critical, not just for diplomats and officials, but for emergency services and the public. Investigators specifically noted concerns about interference with emergency call handling, including the ability for people to reach first responders during a crisis. In a city like New York, even short-term disruption to mobile service can have cascading effects. As the investigation expanded, authorities uncovered additional troubling details. Some of the SIM servers were linked to anonymous calls and messages previously used to issue threats. Others showed evidence of coordination with known criminal networks. At several locations, investigators also found unrelated contraband, including drugs and firearms, suggesting that the SIM infrastructure may have been part of broader criminal operations. While officials have been careful not to publicly attribute the network to a specific group or nation-state, they have confirmed that the investigation remains active and international in scope. No public arrests had been announced at the time of reporting, but law enforcement emphasized that the analysis of call records and traffic patterns was ongoing. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the New York SIM card incident is what it reveals about modern infrastructure. Mobile networks are designed for reliability, but they are also designed for openness. Any legitimate SIM card is, by necessity, trusted by the network. That trust can be exploited. This case demonstrated that it is possible to threaten critical communications infrastructure without breaching a single firewall, installing malware, or exploiting a software vulnerability. All it takes is scale, coordination, and access to physical SIM cards. And as investigators have warned, this may not have been an isolated case, but rather a proof of concept. To understand the full implications of the New York SIM card incident, it's necessary to look beyond what was seized and ask a deeper question. How does an operation of this scale even exist without being noticed? The answer reveals uncomfortable truths about the global telecommunications ecosystem, the economics of SIM cards, and the growing gap between digital security and physical infrastructure. At first glance, acquiring tens or even hundreds of thousands of SIM cards sounds implausible. After all, mobile subscriptions are regulated, linked to billing accounts, and monitored for fraud. In reality, large-scale SIM acquisition is far easier than most people realize. SIM cards can be obtained through a mix of legitimate and illegitimate channels. Bulk business plans, prepaid SIM cards, international resellers, shell companies, and identity fraud all play a role. In some regions, SIM registration requirements are minimal or poorly enforced. allowing cards to be activated with little verification. Once acquired, SIM cards can be quietly shipped, activated, and rotated across different networks to avoid triggering alarms. This is not new. SIM farms have long been used for spam campaigns, verification code abuse, and messaging fraud. What made the New York operation different was not the technique, but the scale, location, and apparent intent. This was not about advertising scams or bypassing app limits. This was infrastructure-level pressure. One of the most sophisticated aspects of the operation was how it was physically distributed. Rather than placing all equipment in a single data center or warehouse, the network was spread across many small sites. Apartments, offices, and commercial units each hosted a fraction of the total capacity. This approach offered several advantages. First, it reduced the electrical and radio footprint at any one location, making detection less likely. Second, it mirrored normal urban activity. A few dozen active SIM cards in an apartment building don't stand out in a city where thousands of phones are constantly connecting and disconnecting. Third, it created redundancy. Even if one site was discovered or shut down, the rest of the network could continue operating. This kind of distributed physical architecture closely resembles how botnets operate online, but translated into the real world. Mobile networks are extremely good at managing random, organic usage spikes. Sporting events, concerts, emergencies, and transit disruptions all generate sudden surges in mobile traffic. Networks are designed to handle these conditions gracefully, even if service quality temporarily degrades. A SIM-based disruption hides within that normal variability. From the perspective of a carrier's monitoring systems, thousands of SIM cards behaving like enthusiastic users doesn't immediately look malicious. The signaling requests are valid. The authentication is correct. The traffic is paid for. There is no obvious attack packet to block. The difference between legitimate congestion and intentional overload is often only visible in hindsight, when patterns are correlated across time, location, and subscriber behavior. By then, the damage may already be done. One of the most serious concerns raised by authorities was the potential impact on emergency communications. Emergency call systems rely on the same cellular infrastructure as everyday calls and texts. While they are prioritized, that prioritization has limits. If signaling channels are overwhelmed, even priority traffic can be delayed. In dense cities, emergency services depend on reliable mobile connectivity, not only for the public, but for responders themselves. Dispatch systems, mobile data terminals, GPS tracking, and coordination tools all rely on cellular networks. A widespread or targeted disruption during a major event could slow response times when minutes matter. This is one reason the New York SIM operation was treated as a national security concern rather than a routine fraud case. Operations of this size are not cheap. The cost of acquiring SIM cards, leasing locations, purchasing specialized hardware, and maintaining connectivity over time runs into millions of dollars. This suggests backing beyond casual criminal activity. Investigators have indicated links to organized crime and have not ruled out the possibility of foreign coordination or sponsorship. However, officials have been careful to avoid premature attribution. What is clear is that this was not a spontaneous effort. It required planning, logistics, technical expertise, and patience. The fact that it was discovered before activation may say more about good intelligence than about a lack of intent. While the incident occurred in New York, the vulnerability it exposed is global. Telecom networks around the world share similar architectures. SIM authentication systems, signaling protocols, and congestion management strategies are largely standardized. That means the same approach could theoretically be replicated in other major cities. What makes this particularly concerning is that the barrier to entry is lower than for many cyber attacks. There is no need to discover a zero-day exploit or compromise protected systems. The tools are commercially available. The infrastructure is open by design. As long as SIM cards exist, they can be scaled. The New York SIM card case highlights a growing challenge for security professionals: the fading boundary between cyber threats and physical infrastructure. This was not a hack. No code was injected. No passwords were stolen. No software vulnerability was exploited. Yet the potential impact rivaled that of major cyber incidents. The attack surface was physical hardware interacting with digital systems, a hybrid space that often falls between regulatory and organizational responsibilities. Telecom security teams focus on networks. Law enforcement focuses on crime. Intelligence agencies focus on national threats. SIM-based operations sit uncomfortably in the middle. In the aftermath of the seizures, telecom providers have reportedly increased monitoring for abnormal SIM behavior, particularly large-scale coordinated activity. There is also renewed discussion around SIM issuance policies, identity verification, and bulk activation controls. However, these measures are not simple to implement. Stricter controls can reduce abuse, but they also risk excluding legitimate users and businesses. Prepaid SIM cards are a lifeline for many people worldwide, and heavy-handed regulation carries social and economic consequences. The challenge is balance. The New York SIM card threat matters not because it happened, but because it almost happened. It demonstrated that modern cities can be disrupted using tools that are legal, inexpensive, and widely available. It showed that trust, the fundamental assumption that a SIM card represents a genuine user, can be exploited at scale. And it reminded security planners that resilience depends not only on defending against sophisticated hackers, but on understanding how everyday technologies can be weaponized. As cities become smarter and more connected, reliance on mobile infrastructure will only increase. Public safety systems, healthcare services, transportation, and everyday communication all depend on networks that were never designed with hostile scale in mind. The New York incident serves as a warning, not of what did happen, but of what could happen again, somewhere else, under slightly different circumstances. In a world where disruption no longer requires breaking in, but simply showing up in overwhelming numbers, security must evolve beyond firewalls and passwords. It must account for trust itself as a vulnerability.